Hello, welcome to my channel Dalma Makes, and welcome to this final video in this little series of miniature furniture when everything comes together. The plan was all along to make this little room box and populate it with the furniture that I created in previous episodes. So I started out with some foam core to create the room itself. I decided on the size of the room and I cut 3 pieces so that it forms a corner, 1 for the floor, 2 for the walls, so that it's open on 3 sides, so that everything that's inside can easily be seen. With the correct pieces cut out, I'm going to start to work on the floor. I have this ABS plastic sheet that has a grid of tiles at a very small scale. I bought it from a specialist miniature supply store. And I'm cutting out a sheet with a sharp knife with the exact dimensions that I need to cover the floor. And I'm just double checking that it's correct. I'm going to be using some solvent glue to attach this to the base because it is ABS plastic. I actually needed something that's going to be permanent and archival. PVA glue might actually peel off from the very shiny, slippery surface. To make the surface more receptive to paint, I'm just roughing up the surface with a nail file. Of course, sandpaper would be handy, but I couldn't find mine. And I'm going to base coat it in black to start with. It's not going to end up black, but I do need a good coat of acrylic paint so that everything on top is going to stick better. And of course, I leave it to dry for a couple of hours. When the base coat is dried, I am going to start painting the tiles. I'm going to be using 3 different colors, and I'm going to paint each individual tile in sort of a random pattern. These sort of tile mosaic floors I've seen in real life, and I just like the aesthetic of them. But this was very tedious and time consuming. I'm using quite a small brush and trying to stay within the lines as best as I can. But I believe the whole process took me about 6 hours of labor just to paint all the little tiles individually. So after the light brown, I have chosen a terracotta-like color, and the final color I chose was a nice yellow ochre. And I didn't film that part because, as I said, this took a very, very long time to actually paint, and I did it over several sessions over a few days. To make it look a little bit aged and used, I am just brushing on little patches of brown. And to seal the paint in and to make the floor tiles a little bit shiny, I am applying a generous coat of yellow tinted shellac ink. Leaving that to dry, I'm turning my attention to the walls, and I found this quite beautiful pattern paper in my stash that sort of looked to me like the perfect wallpaper. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going to put wallpaper on these two walls. In real life, wallpaper is applied in like long sheets, and I wanted to mimic this, so I cut up my pattern paper into strips, and I also wanted to look really old and aged, so I'm roughing up the edges of all of the strips with a sharp blade. I'm still like keeping them in order, making sure that I'm not mixing up the pattern, although I'm sure it would be easy to put it back together like a puzzle, but just making it easier for myself. Besides the roughing up, I'm actually going to make some notches and damage the wallpaper so that it looks really old and used. To bring this effect full circle, I am going to be using an ink pad with some brown ink and drag it along all of the edges and all of the damaged areas. And this is actually quite fun to do and satisfying to watch. When I'm done with that, I am just using a regular glue stick because the foam core actually has paper on the two sides of the foam, and the material I'm using for the wallpaper is paper, so glue stick is the best option for gluing paper to paper, in my opinion, because it's not as wet as PVA glue, and it helps with avoiding curling as it dries, and it dries really quickly. And there we go, I got the walls of my little room box. Of course, I'm trimming edges and any excess. I am using a little bit of PVA glue with a fine point nozzle just to glue down some of those areas where the wallpaper may have peeled. And I'm also using a little bit of brown acrylic paint to just go into some areas and go over the exposed black parts. I have these two coffee stirrers that I want to use as baseboards. So I'm just trimming off the rounded edges on two of them and sanding them flush. And I'm going to be painting them with this nice, rich, reddish brown acrylic paint. This is quite a fluid acrylic paint, so I'm basically staining the wood rather than applying a really thick coat. And now it's time to assemble. My floor has dried, the walls are ready, time to assemble. For this, I'm applying a generous amount of PVA glue. And I'm not scared of overspill because I will be using the baseboards to hide any. Just until the glue completely dries, I'm going to be using some sewing pins to push the wall sections and the floor together so that they stay perfectly flush and that it dries in the correct position. When my coffee stirrers have dried, I am also gluing them in place with PVA glue. And I made sure that they fit perfectly and that they sit flush with each other in the corner. I'm not very good at precision work, But for things like this, with right angles, I try my best to be as accurate as possible. And there we go. Now all that's left is for it to dry. I actually left it to dry for a couple of days. I was working on something else. When it's completely dry, it's safe to remove the sewing pins. Now for the outside, I wanted to make a wood siding outside. And first I started using this leftover piece of cardstock from some packaging, but then I remembered I actually have a paper pad full of wood grain pattern papers that would be perfect. So instead of me toiling to actually paint on a wood grain pattern, it's smarter to actually use the resources that I have. And there was this perfect pattern paper that actually had planks of wood and quite a small grain that I feel like fits really well at this scale. So I'm actually just cutting out those planks of wood. I was looking at reference pictures of real houses with wood siding on Google, and the way they are put on top of each other, they have a little bit of lift at the bottom. So I decided that using hot glue is going to give me the best result for a little bit of lift, as the hot glue itself has a bit of body and is going to allow me to not fully smoosh the paper pieces flat, rather they can have that slightly lifted shape. Of course, I'm going to be helping this later with some paint to accentuate the illusion. And of course, I'm doing the same for both sides on the outside. At one point I actually ran out of them, and for the top 3, as you can see, I don't have pieces long enough, but that's okay because I have a plan for that. And of course I'm just trimming and neatening up all the edges. I'm also hiding the exposed foam core with the leftover strips of paper that I have, and as you can see, I'm just gluing and patching them as best as I can. I just want to have nice, neat little seams all around. Basically just dressing up all of the exposed foam core. I just want it to look finished. When I'm done with gluing on the paper, I am using the same brown acrylic paints that I've been using for aging, and I'm going around everywhere that there may be exposed white core of the paper. First taking care of the edges and neatening them up, and also this helps with more aging and hiding any flaws. Then I turn attention to the wood siding itself, and in an effort to hide those white edges, I'm actually helping create the illusion of those wood planks having more dimension. To seal the paint in and the paper itself, because the paper is still porous at this stage, I am going to be using the same yellow shellac ink and go over the entire outside. Again, this will help with protection, and it also helps with tinting it. Now I have that exposed little square there, and I'm going to hide that with some fake moss. Even more so, I am going to be applying a bunch of fake moss all over the exterior of this little corner of the house. In my imagination, this is sort of like a little house close to the woods, and the growth of moss over time has actually been accepted and encouraged, and I imagine that all around it there's vines and bushes and trees. And I'm just using a mixture of synthetic moss stuff from like terrain making and applying it over PVA glue. After that, I am mixing some water into my leftover glue, thinning it down a lot. And I'm also using some isopropyl alcohol in a spray bottle to lower the surface tension. And then I'm completely soaking all of the moss material in my mixture of water and glue. And this means that the glue will seep in through every little piece of moss, and it will never flake over time. Just like glitter, if it's mixed into glue, well, it won't flake. The same applies for larger particles. I'm using a little bit more of that brown acrylic paint to just go over any mistakes or any glossy parts left over from excess glue. I think with the wood siding and the moss, it became quite realistic. One of the things that I want to have inside this room box is this little snack tea scene. The toast, the cup of tea, and the toast with jam is made out of polymer clay, but I thought it was missing a jam jar. So I'm using a tiny little vial with some purple resin inside, and I'm creating a lid for it. There's some aluminium foil around the rim, and I've cut out a little paper circle to glue on the top to close the lid. And I've also cut out a tiny label to glue on the jar itself. And I'm just going to write blueberry and the year of making onto the label so that it's homemade jam. And I'm just gluing the lid on and the label as well with just small amounts of PVA glue. When the glue dries on this, I will be repainting the lid because I don't like the silver. However, I don't want this to be just a chopping board. I actually want it to look like a tiny low table. So to create that, I'm just using these little MDF pieces, these little circles, stacking them together, gluing them so that I make a sort of stand so that it looks like an end table. When the glue has fully dried, I am going to be using a bit of acrylic paint to just go around the edges and unify the colors of the different pieces of laser cut MDF so that they're all one color, so that it looks like one piece of furniture. And I'm using this metallic antique gold paint to paint the lid of the jar. And there it is, my little end table with the jam and toast and the lemon tea set up, ready for some snacking. And now with all my elements finished and ready, it's time to install them. First of all, I'm going to glue in the fireplace. I have a whole video about how I made this tiny fireplace, and I'm going to leave a link in the description, or you can click the info card in the corner. The same goes for the tiny bookcase. That was last week's video, and I have a well-documented process of how I made that. For feet for the bookcase, I am using 2 buttons because I wanted it to be lifted off the ground so that it's just above that baseboard that I glued in, because I wanted it flush with the wall. I didn't want a gap, and the thickness of those 2 buttons was just perfect. I also have this comfy little armchair with a blanket and a book, and there was also a dedicated video about how I made this, and I'm going to be leaving a playlist in the description below where you can watch the process of this whole project. Another small element that I'm adding to the scene is this little basket with some yarn and knitting needles, and it's sort of fitting the theme of the little granny who this living room belongs to. And finally, my little end table with the toast and jam. And as you have seen, I have used hot glue and PVA glue to attach all of these items permanently to my scene. I have this extra cushion that's made out of the exact same material that the upholstery of the little armchair is made out of, and I decided on where it would look the best, and I fixed it into position. And here we are. Finally, my little room box is finished, and all of the separate elements have been added in. This has been a really fun project, and it took me many weeks to complete. I decided to publish each element separately so that the video wouldn't be 2 hours long. But I hope you will decide to go watch the other videos of how I made all the elements, as it will make more sense that way. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this sort of content, please consider subscribing to my channel. I publish new videos every week. I also do embroidery, sculpting, mixed media, and other kinds of artsy and crafty stuff on my channel. So feel free to have a look. Maybe you'll find something interesting. Let me know about your thoughts in the comments. I would love to receive some feedback. Thank you for watching. I hope you're having a nice day. Bye.